Hi, Troy Love.
Hello there. How are you today, Tammy?
I'm doing well. I'm so excited. It's so funny because I answer the phone a lot and talk to people, and it's been interesting how many times I've been pointing people to your uh, I say go watch the previously recorded versions just to catch up, because like when people are talking, they're talking about attachment wounds and things like that, and I'm just going, I think you, like, if you can just understand that this is happening for someone, it doesn't take away the pain of the betrayal of whatever they're doing. I'm often talking to partners, but you at least have a framework of this person is wounded, and they need to do something about it, not just live in the wound, but there's at least a reason. So
hmm
I've been pointing a lot of people um, towards your work, and
Thank you.
including so for those of you joining, Troy did the in the room Super Saturday Recovery Summit a couple of times, and the videos are on there as well. So there's lots of ways you can, if you aren't here live and you're watching a recording, there's more ways to learn more about Troy's work. And I'm going to say he not only does this, but he also moderates one of the men's groups, one of the men's drop-in groups. And so we're really grateful for your continued service and
Thank you.
supporting the guys on sexandrelationshiphealing.com. So join them there too. So for those of you joining, if you have questions, in the Q&A at the bottom of the screen, if you would type your questions in, you can put from an anonymous attendee, and ask your questions. But we don't have questions yet. So Troy, I'm going to open it up and um,
Great.
see where we
So
go.
great. So with the attendees that are here, if you wouldn't mind putting in the chat box whether you are or you're not familiar with the finding peace model, which is based on the attachment wounds. That's what I call it. So it just helped me to know if you are or you're not familiar with it, because then it can go different places. As I was thinking about it yesterday and then even this morning of what I wanted to present, usually I'm very clear and I'm like, so I'm not sure. So I felt like there was a couple things that I want to talk about with shame and the way that men and women experience shame. And we can talk about the shadows of shame a little bit about that. Um, but as I'm watching some of the posts from the participants, somebody who I know very well, hello, is very familiar with it, and then others are not. So let me just start out with the basic principle of what I start with, which is imagine that we have a yin and yang, and on one side is pain, and the other side is peace. And we want to live in a world where I think we have a lot more peace and love and joy and connection and happiness and all those wonderful blissful feelings. But we also live in a world, like Tammy you were just saying, where right now there's a lot of pain going on. Black Lives Matter, the earthquakes, the fires, the hurricanes, COVID. I was talking with a new client just last week. He was a teenage boy and he was struggling, and dad and mom were there. And they're like, he was a really great kid. He was really respectful. He was doing well in school. He was doing his chores. And then it was almost like overnight something happened. And now he's just really belligerent and he doesn't want to participate and he doesn't do well in school. And I just can't figure out what it is. And I'm like, when did this start? Around March. And so I met with the parents yesterday and I said, okay, your son is experiencing depression. And if you look at everything that he lost, he broke his leg in February, which prevented him from being able to do the sports that he normally did. And then he was not able to go to school. Um, a lot of kids have struggled academically because of that, because the changes the teachers, heaven's sakes, have been struggling with how in the world they're going to keep up with that. And then he lost all his social contact. All of that loss, which is the first of the attachment wounds that we talk about, can be really impacting for somebody. And so that first wound of loss is that things that were there are no longer there. And we talk a lot about it as far as like relationships with maybe a loved one passed away, but we have experienced a ton of loss just in with COVID, the loss of interacting with each other, the loss of being able to attend a graduation that you have been spending 4 years or 2 years getting your master's degree, or you're graduating from high school, or the loss of being able to have a birthday party, the loss of celebrating a wedding, the loss of being able to attend a funeral and have more than 10 people. Like those are huge losses that I don't think people really comprehend just how painful those losses happen to be. And so that's the first of the 6 attachment wounds is loss. And the associated emotions that go with that are anger and sadness. We look at the grief model, Kubler-Ross's grief model of pain, denial first, and then anger second, and then working through the sadness and finally getting to a place of acceptance. And that's what that yin and yang is all about. So on one side, we really want to be able to find peace, but the other side, we are experiencing pain. And so how do we find peace in the pain? And that's the work that I really try to help people figure out. The second of the wounds, they're not in any particular order, but the second of the wounds is neglect. And neglect is when you are wanting someone, you need someone to pay attention to you. So there's the horrific CPS, Child Protective Services version of neglect, where the 2-year-old is being fed by the 4-year-old who's making breakfast and flipping pancakes, and mom and dad are nowhere to be found because they're doing drugs or something. And that's a very severe form of neglect. Hopefully you haven't had to endure that, but there are other versions of neglect that are painful as well. And one of them for me was needing my parents, but my dad was too busy watching the television and my mom was too busy working. And so trying to get their attention, trying to get them to spend time with me, pay attention to me, just didn't happen. And so that can be a wound for many people that can be really, really big, really, really impactful. And then the next one is rejection. And rejection is when you are told by others that you're not wanted, that there's something wrong with you, that you're bad, you're flawed, you're defective, you're not picked for the right team. Many of us maybe remember being picked last on the sports team. That's a form of rejection. And if that's a one-time event, maybe that's not a very big wound, but if you are being rejected in several areas of your life, that's just another um, evidence that your brain picks up on that says, well, see, here's evidence that there's something wrong with you, that you're not enough. So those rejection wounds can also be really big for someone. And then there's abandonment, which is that people just walk out of your life. They stop talking to you. You've probably had clients, I've had clients where the father left overnight, don't have any idea where dad went, mom left, don't have any more contact with them. Parents got divorced, one of the parents just kind of walked out of the kid's life. That's a form of abandonment. Um, and there's other forms of that though. You have a best friend and all of a sudden your best friend just like stops talking to you and you don't understand why and they won't engage with you. And so that abandonment where somebody was there and now they're not there can also be a deep wound for somebody. Betrayal, which a lot of the betrayed partners have that wound, and that's not something that they may have experienced when they were growing up. A lot of these other wounds usually happen when we're kids, but betrayal wound can happen when we're an adult. All the others can happen when we're adult too, but that betrayal wound can be really, really deep. Um, you have a significant other, you've invested your life in him or her, you love them, and then you find out that they've been cheating on you, that they've been lying to you, that they have been keeping secrets. That wound just rips open a deep sense of pain. And then the last is abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse. so those are the 6 wounds. And what I hey, how you doing, John? So what I tell people is that look at look at what porn does, for example, for somebody who has some of these wounds. Porn, when we look at loss, well, porn is something that provides comfort in a weird way. Like in the end, it doesn't, but in that moment, it feels like it does. Um, it's not. It doesn't neglect you. It will be there whenever you want it to pay attention. It doesn't reject you. It's like, come on in. Anybody's welcome. Doesn't abandon you. Um, I think it does betray you, but in the moment, it doesn't feel like it's a betrayal because it feels like, hey, it's like soothing, and then it's a way of comforting some of that. When we look at the science and we look at what it's actually doing, it's exacerbating all of those wounds. It's making them worse. But in the moment, we look at it and it's like, oh, well, no wonder I keep turning to this because that's what I've learned is what will take care of some of these wounds. But then what happens when we start to numb is that it doesn't make us feel better. It makes us feel worse. And then we feel shame. And shame really masks or falls over all of these wounds and says, we're not allowed to talk about these wounds. We're not allowed to talk about the feelings associated with these wounds. We're not allowed to talk about the behaviors that we've been using to numb these wounds. We just got to keep it a secret. We got to shut it in the box in the back and not let anybody know any of that stuff. And so that shame then exacerbates all of the 6 wounds. If I'm feeling ashamed, I'm not going to reach out, even though I need someone to be there. And so I end up neglecting myself. I end up abandoning myself. I end up rejecting myself. I end up abusing myself. I I do those same wounds to myself that maybe my parents did or peers or other people have done to me. And it's really it's just to me it's this vicious cycle that causes a ton of pain. And we go back to that sense of pain. I really want to have some relief. I really want to have some peace, but I'm trapped in this cycle of betrayal, abandonment, all of those things. So that's the model that I use. So to introduce people to it, there's different layers, and I'm not even doing the screen share today just because I just want to talk. But that's the model. Is when I saw based on attachment theory, and to me, I think Rob Weiss has said, or somebody said, that the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety, the opposite of addiction is connection. And when we are disconnected, it causes us pain. And we turn to our drug of choice, we turn to our behaviors of choice to numb that pain. And if we actually could do wound care around that pain, there's not the need to numb as much. And that's what I'm hoping to help people find healing with. So
When you were listing, due to COVID, you were talking about the teen who was depressed and all of those things. And you're talking about weddings and funerals. And I was like, and like people came to mind that fit every single one of those. One of my dear friends moved away from Arizona during COVID, out of state. And I hope at some point I get to see her again in person, but I didn't get to say goodbye to her. And that was just one little example, so that the constant grieving, and I know that people are have varying levels of resiliency, so learning to have support and resiliency and all of that, but identifying the issue first of all and understanding grief. And I was thinking, even when you were talking about the grief, it's so much easier to go, I can't deal with this, I'm going to numb out, which goes right into the circle of, and now I've numbed out and now I'm ashamed of, like, okay, I used or did whatever. And then, so then it's a shame. And so then kind of go, oh, I don't want to feel that. So then, it's a whole vicious cycle. And, I talk often about the maladaptive coping mechanism. So we use these things to cope, but they don't really help us cope. They help us escape or numb out in the moment, but at the end we're, just doing the same,
Mm,
hamster wheel over and over again, and our little addict or our big addict, tells us we deserve to do this, or we can't handle whatever. We need a break. We can just go do whatever. And, it completely justifies why we should do, whatever we're doing. But it's so self-sabotaging, in the end. So,
mhm.
okay. So we have a question. I'm starting a new job during my recovery. Yay. I work at home and partner has started working at home as well. How do I assure her and meet her need, go to meetings and pay attention to work? Struggling as I have diagnosed with ADHD and can't seem to get this across as I'm attempting to be supportive as possible. I'm going to, before you talk, uh, so it was so funny because I had Todd Love. So I've had Troy Love on in the rooms twice, and then I had Dr. Todd Love, and like I had to be very intentional, and I have accidentally emailed one
Oh.
of you thinking the other. So, and I went, wait, no, sorry. But anyway, he did on In the Rooms a great presentation about ADHD and recovery. And the video isn't live yet, but it will be by Friday. So if you can find it on intherooms.com. But otherwise, email me and I'll send you the link to the video. It also has Troy Love's videos and and others as well. Really good information. But like I tried to pay attention about ADHD and I learned so much. For example, Todd said that males who have ADHD untreated, they lose their life expectancy is diminished by 13 years.
Oh
13
wow.
years. I know, I was like, I about fell off my chair. Females, it's about 11 years. So I mean, this is not insignificant. So I'm going to, I want Troy to talk to you about that, but I'm also going to invite you to email me at Tami at seekingintegrity.com for the link to those videos. But really critically important to be treated for the ADHD, not just go, oh, I have it, get diagnosed and whatever. So, but thoughts, Troy?
Well, and it's interesting with ADHD, there's a lot of overlap between what happens with our brains when we're addicts with ADHD as well. That prefrontal cortex just is not performing at the level that it's needing to perform. And when we're flooding our brain with dopamine all the time with our acting out behavior, it contributes to what many people already have with the ADHD. My mother-in-law used to call me Todd for the first year of our marriage, so don't feel bad. And people call me Tony and Terry and all kinds of names that
Well, there's
start with T. So
legitimately Troy Love and
that's right.
Todd Love,
That's got to be
and
very
I
confusing.
love both of you and value your information, but it was just like
Well,
attachment and ADHD, and he's really gifted in that area, and you're
that's
very gifted
awesome.
in your area.
That's awesome.
So,
Well, I'm not offended. Like I said, the people have been calling me by the wrong name forever, so it's all good. All right. So you wanted to, you've been diagnosed with ADHD and you can't seem to meet her need. How do I assure her and meet her need? Okay. So my first question would be, well, what is her need? What are her wounds? And one of the blessings, I think, of identifying what your wounds are is it also gives you a key into what your needs are. So the opposite of loss is gain, but if somebody died, that's not going to work out that well. But so comfort, the opposite of loss is comfort. The opposite of neglect is attention. The opposite of rejection is acceptance. The opposite of abandonment is presence. The opposite of betrayal is trust. The opposite of abuse is compassion. So as you take a look at so part of that is having a discussion about what her needs are. What are her fears? What is she really afraid of? And then speaking to that fear, which is, uh, I absolutely believe is connected to a wound, and then saying, I see your pain. I see it. I see that it matters. It matters to me that you're hurting. I'm sad that I have behaved in a way that's made that wound bigger or has created that wound. And here's what I want to be able to do to assure you that I'm here for you. And here's what I also need to do for my own wound care. Here's what I need to do for my recovery. And so I'm hoping that you can see that when I go to a meeting, it actually helps me be able to show up better for you. Because in the meeting, I'm able to talk about my shame. I'm able to talk about my struggles. I'm able to talk about the pain that I'm feeling right now. I'm able to have these people wrap their arms around me, figuratively or literally, and reassure me that I'm not alone. And I then can walk away from that meeting and walk back home and look you in the eye and say, I'm here. I'm here because I was able to get my love and belonging tank filled up before I came home. Oftentimes what happens is that we panic because we're afraid that the other person is going to leave and is not going to come back. And so we want to cling on to them and not let them go anywhere. And in that process, I'm empty. So I can't fill up your love and belong. I use the analogy of you go into the gas station. Um, if you go to the gas station and the fuel truck hasn't come and filled up the gas, there's no gas for you to get, right? And so if I'm clinging to you and saying you have to be with me, you can't go anywhere, and I'm empty, it's like they pulled up to the gas station and there's no fuel. I can't give them any fuel. And so now we're both empty. And that's not going to be a good combination, just saying. Like, there's going to be a lot of conflict, there's going to be a lot of tears, there's going to be a lot of pointing fingers, blaming, all that kind of stuff. But if I can say, I see your wound, I see your betrayal wound is big, and I see that I've done some things that have really caused that to hurt, and I'm so sad about that. And here's what I'm doing. I'm going to go to a meeting, and you can trust that when I'm late, when I'm done, I'm going to come home. Or if I'm going to run late, you can trust that I'm going to text you and tell you when I'm going to come home. So here's what you can count on from me to let you know that I'm honest and having integrity. But I'm also going to do this because this helps me help me. And in the process, it helps me be able to show up for you too. And hopefully, your partner would be open to having that dialogue and hearing that you do care about them wounds. The beautiful thing, it's one of the tactics that hostage negotiators use when they're negotiating with a hostage person is just helping them feel heard. If I can help you feel heard, the energy goes down, and then we can go forward. So finding what your wife or your partner's needs are, um, honoring that, and then saying what I just said, I think would be helpful.
And on a very practical level, I struggle with mild ADHD. So I have all these tools that I've developed that help me be able to do life. But, I'm thinking, gosh, if you have you're working from home. So if you have a big whiteboard and it has the calendar or, the big calendar and you go, a visible, I'm going to be in this meeting. So addicts lie. So we tell partners all the time, if their lips are moving, that's not what you trust. You trust the actions. And so you being accountable by your actions, it takes time. Dr. Rob talks about this, that you build trust over time by, you showing up, doing what you need to do. The lips moving, oh, I promise I'm going to do it. That doesn't count yet. That takes time. But like, okay, it's Wednesday. Dr. David has a webinar tonight at 5 p.m. Pacific time. Have it on your calendar. You guys can both go to that one. Like if you're very intentional about this is my plan, this is how I'm going to do this, and your partner sees that and sees that you have this on your calendar and you show up for that, that's how you start to build trust. Oh, he said he was going to do that and he did it. Well, that's new. And navigating being home and all of that kind of stuff. It takes, it takes some navigating and, figuring it out. And how do you share the space and how do you have some alone space? And, but talking about that, having, let's talk about, well, this seems to be working really well. This seems to be a little, issue. My husband and I share space. We are sharing a desk. We are like in one big desk. So I am more portable. So when I have a meeting like this, I leave that area and he has his whole system set up. It works out fine. We just had to navigate how we were going to make it work. So communicating on that level, but I'm never going to do that again. Over time, we just do what you say, what you're going to do, and then do it. So, okay. Next question. Some people say you can completely heal from these wounds, and others say it will always be scars. What is the truth?
Oh, yeah. So I love that question. Here, let me try to explain it with an experience that I just had recently. I've been part of a, a therapist group or learning some new strategies of working with trauma. And as part of this group, we all have to read our own trauma story, a trauma story from our past. And I chose to write and read a story that happened to me when I was in middle school and severely bullied. And after I read the story, I got feedback from the other people, and they said, "There's a lot of sadness in the story, but I don't hear any anger."
Mm.
And I sat with that for a moment and I said, well, you know why? Because probably about 10 years ago when I was working through this, I had a punching bag and I had a baseball bat and I was beating the crap out of that punching bag, and I was able to get through the anger side of things. I don't, as I look back now, I don't have anger towards those bullies. I don't. What I have is sadness for my little boy, my little middle school kid who was scrawny and skinny and feeling very much alone in the world. And so I feel a lot of sadness for that. As I've worked through that, I can tell you that I have a rejection wound and it's tied to that, but there has been so much healing around that rejection wound that it's not painful anymore. So whether it's a scar or not, I guess technically it's something that happened to me. But as I look back at that, I recognize, at least for that part of my story, I feel like that's been healed. Do I still have rejection and abandonment wounds that show up other places? Yeah. And do I still have to work on them? Yeah. But when I say that I believe that there's healing, what it means is that I don't carry the anger, I don't carry the resentment, I don't carry the bitterness. I don't carry that anymore around that. I've been able to let that go and find a place of peace for me. I've been able to figure out and connect that I matter and that I'm worthy of love and belonging and that I'm not powerless, that there are things that I can do. And I've been able to rewrite the wound. The wound is the wound, but underneath that, there's a message that's been tattooed on your nervous system that I'm not enough. There's something wrong with me. I'm flawed and defective. I can't trust other people. As I start to rewrite that, even if that wound is still there and it gets bumped, instead of the negative core beliefs of that's something wrong with me, it gets bumped, and I remember, you know what? I'm enough. I matter, and that to me is what healing is. So I do believe that you can heal from those entirely. I believe that, but it doesn't negate that the things happened. It's part of your experience. It's part of who you are and what has made you become who you are, and we can use that to bless other people's lives and to show up with light and love and compassion, or we can use that to continue to feel anger and resentment, and there's not a judgment about that. There's no judgment. It's your experience. But for me, I believe that you can find peace and heal from those experiences.
Yeah, and like I can totally relate. I thought of a couple of things where I go, like I might have this fleeting little sadness or whatever, but I'm not like, oh, devastated by whatever. But I think the ability to just acknowledge that, yeah, that was really painful and it has impacted me. Even the, but like blessings onto the world. And like the stuff that has been the hardest for me, um, I have turned it to, like I had a huge betrayal, about 3 years ago, not my husband, but it was a huge betrayal. And I have so much more empathy for betrayed partners. I mean, I always cared and all that, but like, I feel like I get it at my core, which has, for the work I'm doing now, has been really important, like to have that different layer of empathy. So I look at that as, I'm not thrilled that I had to go through that, but I'm grateful that I had that experience, because it has set me up, to do things differently now than I could have done otherwise. So I think that there's still, a little scar line, but I'm okay with that.
And as Dumbledore says, um, someone's at the door. As Dumbledore says, Harry was very concerned about his scar on his forehead, and Dumbledore said, mine is the map of the underground in London. It's really entirely useful. And so part of that is like, okay, yeah, I have a scar, but how has it blessed my life? How has it helped me show up as a better human being? So.
Okay, next question. My husband developed erectile dysfunction and turned to cybersex and porn to numb. He felt a lot of shame. Should we go back to deal with the ED that helped foster the addiction as well as the early trauma? Med is not an option. Prior to this, the marriage was truly caring and loving.
Okay. It's interesting. Cybersex and porn has a significant correlation with erectile dysfunction, by the way. In fact, when streaming porn came onto the scene about 10, 15 years ago, about that same time, the men in the military who struggled with ED rose by 25%. And the only thing that had changed was that streaming porn was now available. That's the only correlation they could come up with. So there is definitely a correlation between that. But erectile dysfunction in and of itself is a very shameful experience for men, and uh, they we when we're struggling with that, those wounds of rejection are really deep. Like, are you going to reject me? Am I not enough for you? As there's something wrong with me? And then the partner is often wondering the same thing. Like, well, is there something wrong with me that you're not getting aroused? And is there something wrong with me that you're not enjoying that? So erectile dysfunction can really wreak havoc in a relationship, especially if we're holding to the traditional view of what sex is. So Masters and Johnson, when they did their research study several decades ago, they had these 4 steps of what it was, and you get aroused, and then you have this interaction, and then you have the orgasm, and then you're done. That's what it was. Well, if we use that recipe and I can't rise to the occasion, well, I've already failed. Like, every one of those steps, there's so many room for failure. And so part of this is helping just be present with each other and being able to help each other see each other and slow this sexual experience down. And just let's practice just touching each other, not even sexually. Let's just practice what it feels like to have your hand move along my arm and along my torso and my stomach, and let's slow those things down and be present with each other. And as we're doing that, we are treating the wounds of rejection and abandonment and neglect, because I'm here with you. I'm communicating with you. I'm looking you in the eye. I'm having a different sexual experience. And as I've talked with many couples who have been dealing with this erectile dysfunction thing, and we've we've challenged a little bit of the way that we do things. In fact, I've even had them look at like tantric sex, which is not about the erection or the orgasm. There's many people who it's about being present with each other. It's been beautiful. It's shifted things for them. Yeah, it's amazing if he can have an erection and he can have an orgasm. That's fantastic. But if we change the goal a little bit to what can we do to be present? How can we be attached to each other in other ways and be present with each other? I've seen some miraculous healing take place because we're not focused so much on whether the erection is happening or not. And interestingly enough, when we take away that pressure, we take away that stress, the man can then rise to the occasion, for lack of a better word. It's easier for him because there's not that demand, there's not that pressure, and both of you can then have a beautiful experience with each other. So, you know, yeah, you could go get meds if you wanted to, but that's not really what the issue is. For many of these guys, it's an anxiety issue related to rejection and other things. And the connection you made with the cyber sex and porn is huge too. Like there's a correlation with that. So oftentimes if a guy is struggling with erectile dysfunction, that's my first question is, are you looking at porn? Well, let's help you stop looking at porn first, because that's not going to help anything. And then let's talk about how we can help foster connection with you and your partner.
Well, and this person identifies that there's early trauma too. So absolutely, working with a qualified professional to address some of that early trauma, if they're struggling with the wounds, that Troy was talking about earlier, then of course porn, is an easy escape to numb out, and then it just spirals down from there. So I always think getting the right kind of help, the right kind of qualified help, can be really healing as well. So next question, do you have some practical tips what you can do to heal this wound, which can be done alone? And the first thing I thought of was your Finding Peace workbook.
Yeah, so I do have the Finding Peace workbook. It's available on Amazon, and it gives you some tools and homework assignments. It's written, it's a fusion of a fictional story and the workbook like you would see in a normal workbook. So you join 8 other people who have come to this group and who are also wounded in their own ways. You learn the material along with them, and then at the end of each chapter, you're given the workbook content that the participants in the story were given, and you're able to work on that. And a lot of people do that on their own. I've known some people who've started work like book clubs, and
Oh,
they've
that's
done that
great.
as a book club. They've shared it with each other, and so that's one way. If you go back and watch many of the videos that Tammy and I have done together on sexandhealingrelationships.com, I've given lots of tools and practical tips as well as so there's a lot of places that you can go to get some of that.
Yeah, and I think the workbook is great, and trying to do it on your own is an option. I think we absolutely heal better when we can do it in a group. So, if you're a betrayed partner, I would invite you to come to the drop-in groups and share that, that you'd like to start Finding Peace, little subgroup to work through the workbook with other betrayed partners. If you're, well, Todd leads one of the men's groups, and they work through that. But there are ways to create a little group of peers that can help you process through that. And to me, that would be the more ideal if you can. So, and this person asked to repeat the opposites. Do you mind taking a moment and doing
Sure.
that?
Okay, so the 6 wounds are loss, neglect, rejection, abandonment, betrayal, and abuse. So the opposite of loss is comfort. The opposite of neglect is attention. The opposite of rejection is acceptance. The opposite of abandonment is presence, somebody being there with you. The opposite of betrayal is trust. And the opposite of abuse is compassion and respect.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, part of my attachment wound is early sexual abuse. I am so sorry, from my older sibling. Oh, whole family is aware of it at this point, and the whole issue seems to be minimized. I feel that part of my recovery will involve having to confront the issue more in depth with them, mom, dad, sibling. Currently, I've put up a boundary where I speak to none of them because of their reaction to the problem. Am I right? Or can I recover without having to get closure from them who are deeply in denial and shame?
So first, thank you for your courage in sharing that with us, and I'm sad with you for what you've experienced. As I'm looking at that, I'm looking at the attachment wound is abuse. That is the primary one, but there's also abandonment. Like no one is showing up and having that conversation. The there's a rejection wound as well. So these wounds kind of overlap each other, but your primary wound is abuse. And what I'm hearing is that for whatever reason, your family is not in a place where they're willing to be open. And most of the time that's because of shame. Most of the time that's because they are so ashamed and not even maybe even willing to take a look at what role they did or did not play in that it becomes really unsafe. So the interesting thing about boundaries is that there's nothing wrong with having boundaries. In fact, we wholeheartedly encourage them. uh, when we connect with I'm worthy of love and belonging, I matter and I'm enough, that actually facilitates my ability to have better boundaries. It's not a forced thing when I believe that I'm worthy of love and belonging. And part of that is recognizing, well, this doesn't feel safe. So it doesn't feel safe. I would love to be able, I'm putting words in your mouth, I don't mean to, but I would love to have a conversation with mom and dad and the sibling about what happened and see if we can find some resolution to that. But right now, it really does not feel safe. They're dismissing me. They're pretending that it didn't happen. And so because of that, it's almost like the story that your impotent one, which is a shadow shame, we haven't talked about them today, but the impotent one says, well, then you're not going to be able to move forward. Well, I talk to people whose maybe their abuse person has died. So what are they? Do you have to have a conversation with the perpetrator in order to heal? I don't think you do. I understand why you would want to. I understand the value that that could be if it's done in a place that's actually healing. But I want you to know that you can heal from this regardless of whether or not they are willing to be participants in your healing journey. You can get the validation, just like I was sharing a few moments ago, as I was in this group with these other professionals, and we're hearing each other's stories and we're validating the pain. That is incredibly healing. And so, although it would really be nice to have my dad or my mom honor and own up to what they've done, my dad's passed away, so that's not going to happen. Having somebody else hold space for me and honor and show love and compassion and support for me as healing. And I've come to a place where I recognize mm, some of these people in my life just are not safe, and they probably will never be safe because they're not willing to do their own things. And it's sad because I miss out on a relationship with them. They miss out on a relationship with me. But in the end, because I know I'm worthy of love and belonging, I'm not going to put myself in a place where I'm going to be hurt again.
Yeah, and I was thinking, unfortunately, this is not atypical where, the family unit, like they just can't, they don't have the coping skills to be able to identify that this happened and that there's problems from it. It's sweep it under the rug and often the person that was abused is the problem because they're trying to talk about it. And if we just don't talk about it, then we don't really have to deal with it. So unfortunately, what I hear is, parents and sibling offender, but parents, absolutely not stepping up and keeping you safe, but very broken people. So you having a strong boundary for yourself of what is safe and they aren't, to me makes lots of sense. I'm so glad that you aren't sweeping it under the rug, that you're understanding and willing to step into it, because I know it's got to be very painful for you to deal with in the now, as well as what you've experienced in the past. So, but that's all the questions we have. So anybody else have any questions, go ahead and pop them in the Q&A. Other thoughts, Troy?
I was just reading in the chat with somebody who was talking about the Japanese art of kintsugi. I'm not saying it right. Which, if you go look, it's a beautiful metaphor. What happens with it's a form of art with Japan, where they have clay pots or plates or different things, and if it breaks, what they do is they put it back together with gold.
Oh, wow.
And it's beautiful. So they put it back together, and what was broken now becomes even more valuable as a piece of art. The the cracks in the art and the filling it up with gold makes it even more beautiful, and that's, to me, is an amazing metaphor of what is happening with us. It's um, so he or she was identifying that it's not about the scar so much, it's about the beauty behind it. And so that metaphor of the Japanese art, it really speaks to me. It resonates with me a lot. About that's really what we're doing. We're filling in the holes with gold.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I love that. I have not heard that before, and I love that more than thinking of super glue, quite frankly, because super glue glows, but it doesn't have the effect of gold. So, but I've always gone with the like when you break your arm or leg or whatever, where it's healed, it's stronger there in that
Right?
spot than the rest of your bone, and so I've always gone with the strength aspect, but I love the gold and I love glitter. But
Yeah. Go Google it. It's a beautiful.
yeah, I'm gonna have to do that. But even knowing that what was my brokenness has become my strength, that was helpful for me, to be able to lean into that, and want to find that healing, knowing, like, in the pain, going, because am fortunate, I think, to have experienced, healing in other areas. So, so when this last thing happened, like I knew I just had to, have support and go through it. I couldn't shove it in the closet. I couldn't, shove it under the rug. Like, I had to just know that this was a process and that I'm going to get through it, and that there will be, strength and benefits from going through that. But yeah, seriously, love the gold. I'm going to go look that up. So for those of you, I'll spell it in case you're on if you're watching the video. So it's KINTSUGI. So if you look that up, I bet it will be information that you will value. So, other questions?
Well, I was talking to somebody the other day about wounds and healing, and they were like, "Is there a way to speed this up?" And therapeutically speaking, we do have tools and things to help speed up healing a little bit. But I said, look, okay, so let's say that you broke your arm or you cut your leg. You're gonna like shame yourself and say, well, how come you're not healing faster? And you can try and wish and hope, but wounds take time to heal. And so being patient with ourselves, doing the things that create an environment to help the wounds heal is also important. Like if I'm not cleaning the wound, making sure that it's being taken care of, it can get infected and it's going to take a whole lot longer to heal. But if I provide an environment of healing, it will help heal it, and it will heal it faster with minimal scarring, and we're able to move forward with our lives. So being kind to ourselves, practicing self-compassion, recognizing that these wounds do need some tender, loving care is part of the healing process. And that's how we come to a place of peace, when we can do that.
But and I think what I was talking about a bit ago too, we can help others heal. We can be the, look, I did it. I'm reaching out my hand to you. I can be supportive of you, or somebody's ahead of me on the healing path, and I'm tagging on with them. That's how we can support each other in this process, because we're not shaming each other. We're going like, I get it. I understand where you're at, and it's okay. And you're going to make it through, and I'm here for you. That's how we, in this, like we were talking about earlier, in the COVID and the seasonal affect disorder and the wildfires and everything that's going on. That's how we're going to, get the other side of this, is by, being as a community and helping someone else, but recognizing when we need, I really need a little support, for me right now.
Mhm.
Well, if we don't have any, I don't have anything else. And um, so if people don't have any other questions, we may end the video early, end the session early.
That's okay.
Yeah.
I appreciate the person who was chatting earlier and asked the question and was putting some things in the chat box about, you are trying to show up and do the best that you can, and you're owning that you've failed her in many ways. I just want you to know that we all are human and we all make mistakes, and none of us show up 100% the way that we want to. What's important though is that you are here and you're wanting to figure out how you can do it a little bit differently, learning and growing. And that's all of us. So I honor you, and I'm hoping for you, and I'm glad that you're here today.
So somebody says they've got questions, but they haven't popped into the question box yet. So we'll wait just another minute. So, but yeah,
Sure.
and I agree, but it's being intentional and, and taking action. And and it, I can't just say, well, I have a plan. So my friend and I were talking about, working out, and she's kind of let herself not be on the workout thing. And so she committed to me that she was going to work out. And then she texted me and said, I've gone, and I was like, great, so it's setting an intention, having accountability, so now she's back on track, and that's a good thing. So I would invite you, it can't just be, well, I'm planning to go whatever, or do whatever. And it's like committing to it, having accountability around it, that's what starts to be transformative. So okay, there's too much stuff going in the chat. I can't,
That's all right.
yeah.
The person who was wondering, yes, there we go.
Okay, so there's a question: how much does fiction affect reality? Do violent video games make kids violent? Do violent porn make men violent?
Wow. There's a lot of research to say that it can and can't. So I don't have a definitive answer for that. It was interesting, just yesterday I was listening to somebody talking about fiction, and the beauty of fiction is that we can pause momentarily on the realities of life, and we can experience the world in ways that maybe we aren't able to experience if we were just staying in reality all the time. And by what they meant was that we can explore emotions in ways that maybe we wouldn't really be able to explore because we're reading a fictional story that may or may not actually be reality based, but the emotions that that person is feeling, the things that they're struggling with, the metaphors that they're dealing with are all a part of our reality. So whether it's a fictional book, we can still draw from that. And I think of some of the saga stories. If you look at my background, I like Star Wars, okay? I'm a geek. But the metaphors that are drawn from that fictional account are things that I apply in my life every day. And so even though I don't live in a fictional world, I try really hard to live in a reality world. I'm able to draw and use metaphors from those as a way of helping me frame my reality in a way that gives me vocabulary and words to be able to speak. As far as whether violent games make kids violent, like I said, the research is mixed on that. Some people will believe that violent kids are drawn to violent video games, and other people will say, well, violent video games make them violent. Does violent porn make men violent? Again, it's strange. What I tell people, there's a lot of individuals who are really scared that if you look at porn, you're going to become a pedophile. That's not usually what happens. However, every pedophile has been using porn. So there is a correlation, and I can understand why people would jump to that conclusion, but that is not usually what happens. There's people behave the way they do because they're wounded. So when someone's violent or somebody is perpetrating on somebody else, my theory is that it's very much tied to those unresolved trauma, and they haven't dealt with those. And they may be drawn to things that help them act out or do those other kind of things that wouldn't, I don't think help. Don't think violent video games helps anything like that. I go back to one of my heroes is Mr. Rogers, and his conversation he had with Congress. You can go and watch it. And as he talks about, they were wanting to pull the funding from PBS. And he talked about how he feels like it's so much more dramatic to be able to watch two men talk about their feelings and resolve them in a healthy way than it ever would be to watch somebody go punch somebody in the face. Unfortunately, the world that we live in and the media has a different view on how we do that. But his premise was being present with each other and having those conversations is really where the healing is. So I don't know if I totally answered your question. I really believe, though, that underneath all of that are wounds. And if we can talk about them, what Mr. Rogers says is what is mentionable is manageable. If we can talk about them, if we can share with another trusting person and work through some of those things, we can resolve a lot of the things that we as a world just aren't talking about.
Yeah, and I was thinking, I mean, the challenge, the fiction, I was thinking porn because that's what, I deal with a lot of people that are into porn, and then they expect their partner to act like the person in the porn. They expect it to be that non-reality, and your poor brain is getting hit with all these rapid fire new images, and so like it then the real person is way less exciting than these rapid fire all new images and everything else. But so I think it can contort what your view of reality can be and what a real relationship is. I also find for people that struggle with reality, oh wait, that's an addicts, that the more that we go numb out and go off into these places, like everybody needs a mental health break, so whether like I'm doing puzzles or I like forensic files. I watch a lot of the murder solving things.
Me too.
It doesn't make me want to go murder anybody. Like
No.
really, so I really do discern, the difference between, to me, those are puzzles, so I'm looking at how can I solve another puzzle, but I think the more we as addicts learn to live in reality, the better, because it's really easy to go numb out in unhealthy ways, because we don't have the coping skills to deal with life. So learning how to deal with life, matters. So now we are out of time. So thank you all for joining us and the great questions. And thank you, Troy, as always. So he'll be back the 4th Wednesday of October. Can you believe we're heading into
It's
October? So
crazy.
yeah. So
At least this year's coming to a close. That's all I'm saying.
yeah, but so here's what I think is going to happen, because everybody goes, oh, it's 2020. And they are on, I think, on January 1st of 2021, going to think that things have radically
Magically
changed.
happen. Yeah,
And
no.
I don't think that's going to happen. They're talking about all of this long term. And I'm like, I have this feeling we're going to have this like, world. Oh my gosh, it didn't all get better when the calendar changed. So I don't know.
Right.
But we'll be here for you in January too. So
Thanks everyone for being
thank
here.
you. Bye-bye.
Bye.